Okay, this is of Mice and Men, Chapter 6, the grand finale. Um, I'm using Genius. If you put in a search of Genius and of Mice and Men, Chapter 6, this is what comes up. And what it is an annotated version of the novel. And I like this because it makes us pause and think about what we're reading as we go through the chapter. I'm going to go through this chapter really fast. I might not do it word for word. Because, hopefully you've read this on your own. This is supposed to be like a review of what we've read. So here, this person says a cycle of reference to the same area that the beginning of the novella, and at the end symbolizing an endless routine of hope. Besides an endless, I don't know about an endless routine of hope. I think that it is actually they're back to nature. You remember when in the first chapter George said, "I saw those what do they call them? Whatever they are, the machines that they use to buck barley." He said, "I saw them. Means we're going to be busting our guts all day," and it's like they're part of the machines. And so I want to stay here next to the river for one more night before we go into onto the ranch. So this, I think, represents nature, whereas when they were on the farm, they were part of the machinery and they were just like working, working for the man, not getting paid really well and never getting ahead. And so here we are back to where they were happy before they arrived at the ranch, and they're alone, and it's in this beautiful mountain setting. And it's also a matter an example of the foreshadowing, where at the beginning of the novel George said, "If anything bad happens, Lenny, come back here and hide in the bushes." Okay. And I told you this before when we first started the book, that there at the very beginning of the book, if you look back, you find within the first 2 pages a heron that's standing in the shallow pool. And now there is a what do you call it? And it flies away when George and Lenny approach. And now the same little periscope snake that was there at the beginning is back. And the heron is standing there in the shallows, and it, with a silent beak, glanced down and plucked it out by the head. And the beak swallowed the little snake while its tail waved frantically. So what this is it's an example of like survival of the fittest, and it's violence also, that like frantically the little snake is trying to escape and doesn't, it's killed. So again, you could say foreshadowing, but also it is the theme of survival of the fittest here in the first chapter. And so here we go. Suddenly Lenny appeared out of the brush, and he came as silently as creeping as a bear. We're back to where we're comparing Lenny to like a dumb animal. Remember at the very beginning, he has paws, and when he drinks the water, he just puts his head right in the pool. He doesn't like cup his hands. So it's continuously describing Lenny as a large animal. And when Lenny appears out of bush, again, the heron, just like it did in the first, yep, there it is. Survival of the fittest, dog eat dog world. The heron was more powerful than the snake. But Lenny comes around and scares the heron because he's smaller, stronger, and bigger than the heron, and the heron flies away. So, um, uh, the heron flies away when Lenny appears, and the little snake slides away. And then Lenny comes and sits by the water edge. And when Little Bird skittered over the dry leaves behind him, his head jerked and he strained toward the sound with eyes and ears until he saw the bird. This shows that Lenny is slightly paranoid. He knows that George will not be happy when he finds him, or neither will the townspeople. This is also a major change in his self-control from chapter 1, where he ignored the world. And now he's like afraid of it because he knows something bad's going to happen. When he was finished, he sat down the bank with his head to the side of the pool so that he could see the trail's entrance. He embraced his knees and laid his chin down on his knees. A light came out of the valley, and as it went, the tops of the mountain seemed to blaze with increasing brightness. Steinbeck personified things with light and silence. In this case, the light is symbolizing hope, like it does in numerous parts of the novel. The hope is leaving the valley shortly after Lenny enters, foreshadowing his death. Okay. Lenny said softly, I didn't forget you, Bet. Goddamn, hid here in the brush just like George said. He pulled his hat down over his eyes. George gonna give me hell. George gonna wish um, he was alone and I wasn't bothering him then. So he's saying, like he did in first chapter, he said, George, I'll go live in that cave in the hill, right? And then George won't have the trouble taking care of him. He turned his head and looked at the bright mountaintops. I can go off up there, find a cave, he said. And he continued sadly, and never have no catch up. But I won't care. If George won't want me, I'll just go away. I'll go away. And then from out of Lenny's head, there came a little fat old woman. She wore bullseye glasses and she wore a huge gingham apron with pockets. And she was starched and clean. She stood in front of Lenny and she put her hands on her hips and she frowned disapprovingly. And when she spoke, it was Lenny's voice. So out of his imagination comes this little old lady, right? And she's gonna give Lenny hell for what he done, right? I told you, I told you, I told you, man. George, because he's such a nice fella and good to you, but you don't never take no care. You do bad things. Lenny answered her. I tried, Aunt Claire. I tried. I can't help it. Right? It seems that Lenny's mental state has grown just a little bit. After he killed Curly's wife, he's run and he begins to hallucinate. He's going to do more than hallucinate about Aunt Clara. Okay. You never give me you never give no thought to George, she went on in Lenny's voice. He's been doing nice things for you all the time. When he got a piece of pie, he always gave you half and more than half. And if they say it was any ketchup, he'd let you have some ketchup. I know, said Lenny miserably. I tried, Aunt Claire. I tried and tried. She interrupted him. All the time, he could have had a good time if it wasn't for you. He wouldn't took his pay and raised hell in a whorehouse, and he could have sat in a pool room and played snooker. But he got to take care of you. Lenny moaned with grief. I know, Aunt Claire. I'm gonna go up in those hills and find a cave and live there, so I won't do no more trouble for George. You just say that, she said sharply. You're always saying that, and you know, son of a bitch and well, you ain't never gonna do it. You'll just stick around and stew and bite Jesus out of George all the time. Lenny said, I must go just as well go up there. George ain't gonna let me tend no rabbits now. Aunt Claire was gone, and from out of Lenny's head popped a gigantic rabbit. It sat on his haunches in front of him, and it wiggled its ears and crinkled its nose. And it spoke in Lenny's voice too. 10 wabbits. It said scornfully, you crazy bastard. You ain't fit to lick the boots of no wabbit. You forgot him and you let him go hungry. And what did you do? And then what do you think George would think? I wouldn't forget, Lenny said loudly. The hell you wouldn't, said the rabbit. You ain't worth a greased jack pin to wham it you into hell. Christ knows George done everything he could to jack you out of the sewer, but it won't no good. If you think George gonna let you 10 rabbits, you're even crazier than usual. He ain't. He gonna bet hell out of you. We're gonna beat hell out of you with a stick. That's what he's gonna do. Now Lenny retorted belligerently. He ain't neither. George wouldn't do nothing like that. I know George since I forgot when. He ain't never gonna raise his hand to me with a stick. He's nice to me. He ain't never gonna be mean. Well, he's sick of you, said the rabbit. He's gonna beat the hell out of you, and then you're gonna go away and leave you. He won't, said Lenny frantically. He won't do nothing like that. I know George. Me and him travels together. But the rabbit repeated softly over and go, he's gonna leave you, you crazy bastard. He's gonna leave you all alone. He's gonna leave you, you crazy bastard. Lenny put his hands over his ears. He ain't. I tell you he ain't. And he cried, oh, George, George. George came quickly out of the bush and the rabbit scuttled back into Lenny's brain. George said quietly, what the hell are you yelling about, Lenny? Lenny got down on his knees. You ain't gonna let me, you're not gonna leave me, are you, George? I know you ain't. George came stiffly near and sat beside him. Nah, I noticed, said Lenny. I ain't that kind. George was silent. Lenny said, George, yeah, I done a bad thing. It make no difference, George said, and he fell silent again. Only the topmost ridges were in the sun now. The shadow in the valley was blue and soft, and from the distance came the sound of men shouting at each other. George turned his head and listened to the shouts. Lenny said, George, yeah, you ain't gonna give me hell? Give you hell? You know, like you always done before, like I didn't have you, I'd take my $50. Jesus Christ, Lenny, you can't remember nothing that happens, but you remember every word I say. Well, ain't you gonna say it? George shook his head. He was woodenly. If I was alone, I could live so easy, his voice said monotonously and had no emphasis. I could get a job and I would have no mess. He stopped. Go on, Lenny said, and when the end of the month came, I could get my $50 and go to a cat house. He stopped again. Then he looked eagerly at him. And George, ain't you gonna give me no hell? No, said George. Well, I can go away, said Lenny. I'll go up there in those hills and I'll find a cave and if you don't want me. Lenny shook his head. No, I want you to stay here with me. Lenny said craftily, tell me like you done before. Tell you what, about the guys and about us. George said, guys like us got no family. They got make a little steak and then they blow it in it. They ain't got nobody in the world that gives a hoot in hell about them. But not us, said Lenny happily. Tell him about us now. George was quiet for a moment. But not us, he said, because I got you and I got you. We got each other, and that's what gives a hoot and a hell about us. Lenny cried in triumph. The little evening breeze blew from the clearing, and the leaves rustled, and the wind waves flowed up the green pool, and the shouts of men sounded again, this time much closer than before. George took off his hat. He said shakily, take off your hat, Lenny. The air feels fine. Lenny moved his hat dutifully and laid it on the ground in front of him. The shadow in the valley was bluer, and the evening came fast. On the wind, the sound of the crashing in the brush came to them. Lenny said, tell how it's going to be. George had been listening to the distant sounds. For a moment, he was businesslike. Look across the river, Lenny, and I'll tell you so you can almost see it. Lenny turned his head and looked across the pool and up the darkening slopes of the Billions. We're going to get a little place, George said. And he reached into his side pocket and brought out Carlson's Luger. He snapped off the safety, and the hand and the gun lay on the ground behind Lenny's back. He looked at the back of Lenny's head, the place where the spine and the skull were joined. A man's voice came up the river, and another answered. Gone, said Lenny. George raised the gun, and his hand shook, and he dropped his hand to the ground again. Go on. How's it going to be? We're going to get a little place. We'll have a cow, said George, and we'll maybe have a pig and chickens. And down the flat, we'll have a little piece of alfalfa for the rabbits. For the rabbits, George repeated. And I get to tend the rabbits, and you get to tend the rabbits. Lenny giggled with happiness and will whip off the fat of the land. Yes. Lenny turned his head. No, Lenny, look down across the river. Like you can almost see the place. Lenny obeyed him. George looked down at the gun. There was a crashing footsteps in the brush now. George turned and looked toward them. Go on, George, what are we going to do? Going to do it soon. Me and you and me, everybody going to be nice to you. Ain't going to be no more trouble. Nobody going to hurt nobody or steal from them. Lenny said, I thought you was mad at me, George. No, said George. No, Lenny, I ain't mad. I've never been mad, and I ain't mad now. That's the thing I want you to know. The voices came close, and George raised the gun and listened to the voices. Lenny begged, let's go to that place now. Let's go to that place now. Sure, right now. We gotta. George raised the gun and steadied it, and he brought the muzzle of it close to the back of Lenny's neck. The hand shook violently, but his face set and his hand steady, and he pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot roared up the hills and rolled down again, and Lenny jarred and then settled slowly forward to the sand, and he lay quivering. George shivered and looked at the gun, and then he threw it from him back to the bank near the pile of ashes. The brush seemed filled with cries and the sound of running feet. Slim's voice shouted, George, where are you, George? Let's see. I think the pile of old ashes, the ashes that they had when they first arrived. Ash is a strong symbol of death, seen just moments after the killing of Lenny. However, it also shows the death of their friendship, as it's the same fire George and Lenny created in the opening chapter of this highly cyclical story. By the side of the river, where they eat beans without ketchup. But George sat stiffly at the bank and looked at his right hand that had been thrown away. The group burst into the clearing. Curly was ahead. He saw Lenny laying on the sand. "You got him, by God!" He went over and looked down at Lenny, and then he looked over at George. "Right in the back of the head," he said softly. Slim came directly to George and sat down beside him. He sat very close. "Never you mind," said Slim. "A guy's got to sometimes." But Carlson was standing over George. "How'd you do it?" he asked. "I just done it," said George tiredly. "Did he have my gun?" "Yeah, he had your gun." "And you got it away from him? And you took it and you killed him?" "Yeah, that's how." George's voice was almost a whisper. He looked steadily at his right hand that had held the gun. Slim twitched George's elbow. "Come on, George. Me and you will go in and get a drink." George let himself be helped to his feet. "Yeah, drink." Slim said, "You had to, George. I swear you had to. Come with me." He led George into the entrance of the trail and up towards the highway. Curly and Carlson looked at one another, and Carlson said, "Now what the hell are you supposed eating those guys?" Slim tries to imitate a moment of catharsis ensuring George that he had done the right thing. Slim is a neutral party throughout the novella, but almost seems to praise George in taking out what was arguably a selfish act of mercy for someone he truly cared about. All right, some of the annotations aren't that great. Like, for example, I would have pointed out that two men entered the trail and now two men are leaving by the trail. So the novel ends with two men together, and maybe Slim and George will become very good friends. And it said like George was godlike, so maybe like George found God, right? Because you see how Slim says you had to do it, and like in a way is like forgiving George for what he had to do. And George did have to do it, because if George did not do that, Curly and Carlson and the people would have found him. And like Curly said, "I'll shoot him in the guts and make him bend over." They're talking about buckshot, and that gives you a very painful, uh, long death, because each little pellet goes into a separate part of your stomach, and then you bleed out. So they were going to be mean to Lenny. Even while he was still alive, Curly would have been kicking him while he was laying on the ground. So instead, George mercifully just ended it for Lenny, because Lenny had killed someone, Curly's wife. And those days, now they have degrees of murder. In those days, they didn't have degrees of murder. It wasn't like, what am I call it? Oh, this was an accidental, unplanned murder, so therefore he should get 15 years. It wasn't like that. Murder is murder, and it would have been a sentence to death with the lynching, especially since it was put out there that Lenny was armed and dangerous, because Carlson's Luger had disappeared. And we've come to find out that George took the gun, because George, as soon as he understood what had happened to Lenny and what might happen to Lenny if a lynch mob went after him, he went into the bunkhouse and he got Carlson's Luger so that he could kill Lenny himself. And so it was a mercy killing. And as you got to remember, one thing it's very hard sometimes to remember that you're in a totally different time frame. And this is the 1930s. And, there wasn't a Department of Mental Health where they took people like Lenny and maybe tried to help him, or at least housed him. Like they said, they would have shackled him to a prison wall. And like Slim said, that wouldn't be no good, right? They would have treated him like a dog with the description Crooks gave earlier on of how they would have treated him. So I hope you enjoyed Mice and Men.